Hey Google, what's the Super Bowl score as of right now?
In Super Bowl 59, the Eagles are currently leading the Chiefs 34-6 at the end of the third quarter.
Thanks. So, can't wait to hear tomorrow morning that the Chiefs won. Hello everyone, my name's Stonsey Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonsey. Today we are reading pages 81 to 200 of The Butterfly Garden. Yeah, right now the Super Bowl is happening. And what am I doing? Creating audiobooks for all you fantastic people. Cause who likes sports anyway? Ooh, a lot of you are raising your hand. Like, not you, but like, ooh, you know? Whatever. Have your own opinion, and I shall have mine. So, without further ado, let's begin. Except if we had been any two people, my skin probably would have been crawling. It certainly never crawled to Topher when we piled onto Jason's or Cake's couches, or any of the other boys from work. Intimacy with the gardener was as much of an illusion as the wings he carved into our backs. It didn't make anything real. He doesn't like talking about it with me. Given that we are sort of harem, I don't imagine most young men would be comfortable discussing this with their fathers. You might ask your parents for tips on how you approach someone, or what to do on the first dates, but the sex thing is usually verboten, even when there isn't a question of willingness. And it was another reminder that we aren't just any two people. All he did was laugh and turn my head and kiss me. It occurred to me that I couldn't do his private kitchen in suite and pick up my knife to drive it through his heart. I could have killed him then and there. But what stopped me was the thought that Avery would inherit the garden. Avery was all the excitement when I first introduced him to the garden. We talked about it whenever we were alone. Perhaps a father doesn't need to know many details about his son, but I could see that Desmond has done anything more than look around. Does that disappoint you? I asked neutrally. It puzzles me. His hand traveled up my arm and back to the neck. Then he nugged at the tie in my dress. The black silk pieces came loose in his fingers, and he watched them slither down to the collarbones of my waist, leaving my breast bare. He lightly traced one nipple and he spoke. He's a healthy young man surrounded by beautiful women, and I know isn't a virgin, yet he doesn't avail himself to the opportunities. Perhaps he's still adjusting. Perhaps. Or perhaps variety isn't what appeals to him. He lifted me slightly in the chair and he shifted under me, giving himself better access to my breast, pushing the dress over my hips and my thighs. He looks for you when he comes, and even if it doesn't find you. Apparently I'm a very direct sort of person, I said dryly, and he chuckled. Yes, I could see why he put his questions to you. What would you do if he came to you as I do? I assume that as with you and Avery, we would do whatever he asked of us. Is that incorrect? No, you would let him touch you? He bent his head to my breast, his lips moving against the sensitive skin. You let him take his pleasure with you? Desmond wasn't his father, but he was his father's son. But he was his father's son. Unless you tell me otherwise, I do what's asked of me. He groaned and tugged the dress completely off, dropping in a pool of black puddle on my chair. As if his massive hands turned to my body, traitor. And not a word said except for my name. Over and over, harsh cries against the silence. There are some qualities, some incorporate things, that have double life. There's twofold silence, sea and shore, body and soul. One dwells in lonely places. He took me again and again that night, in a chair on the carpet in the king-size bed, studied everything I could remember, even drink recipes. But long before the morning came, I ran out of words and felt the poison seeping through the cracks of my soul. I had forgotten to use the sick feeling of letting the gardener fuck me, and I had never used to the nauseating pain that came with letting him believe he loved me. When he finally escorted me back to my room, he sat on the edge of my narrow bed and settled a blanket around me, stroking the hair behind my face and giving me a lingering kiss. Hope Desmond comes to realize the extraordinary young woman you are, he whispered against my lips. You could be so good for him. After he left, I got out of bed and stood in my shower, scrubbing the skin until it was raw because I wanted to pretend that I didn't slough through the feeling of his touch. Bliss found me there, and with unexpected tact, she didn't say a word. Helped me rinse off the last of the soap and conditioner, turn off the water, toweling my hair as I dried off the rest of me, and the hair was brushed free, a tangle was banded my back in a neat braid. We go together under the blankets. For the first time, I understood why she think about jumping. For the first time, those extra years didn't seem so worth negligible as a possibility of escape. For the first time in a year and a half, I felt every drag of needle cross my skin as the prism was inked to my body. If I'd ever been for much for hope, neither had I been much for despair. But I couldn't feel it choking me with every memory. I took a deep breath, listening to the echo of Desmond's voice in the cave, and let it remind me to keep breathing, so that even Bliss, who saw me through things the others have never even imagined I felt, would see me how fucking scared I was. In terror she spoke, letting sink her wings as they trailed into my dust. In agony sobbed, letting sink her plumes till they trailed in the dust, till they sorrow trailed in the dust. But my wings couldn't move and I couldn't fly, I couldn't even cry. All that was left of me was terror and agony and the sorrow. Victor leaves the room without a word. A moment later, Yvonne steps into the hall in the observation room, handing them 2 bottles of water. Ramirez called with an update, she reports. The girls in a delicate condition are stabilizing. They still want to talk to Maya before answering to any questions. Senator Kingsley is starting to lean on Ramirez to get to Maya. Shit. He scrubs his cheek. Can Ramirez keep her leashed in a hospital? For a little while. She's negotiating between a senator and her daughter. She figures she can get a few hours out of everything else going on. All right, thanks. Let us know when he gets back. Will do. Politicians are like child services, he thinks. Ultimately useful, with a pain in the ass all the way there. He returns to the interrogation room and hands Inara one of the bottles. She accepts it with a nod, unscrewing the cap with her teeth rather than her tender hands. Half the bottle disappears before she puts it down. Her eyes close, one finger traces patterns on the metal surface of the table. She gathers herself in the next question. He watches the motion, his gut clenches. He realizes that he thought were nonsenses, but was true of the butterfly wings, traced again and again into the metal, like a reminder of what brought her here. I'm running out of time to protect you, he says finally. She just looks at him. Powerful people want to know what happened. They're not going to have my patience with you, Nara. And I've been very patient. I know. You need to stop dancing around this. Tell me what I need to know. For a while, the gardener just had to continue being baffled by the younger son. Desmond came in the garden regularly, but he didn't touch anyone and pass a hand to help him up. And he brought his textbooks. During the days, I stayed with the newest arrival, an exquisite creature of Japanese descent. During the nights, Danielle stayed with the sleeping girl, and I sat up on the cliffs, clinging to the illusion of space. Desmond frequently joined me there, and the first 2 times we sat in silence, each of us lost our own reading. It had been a long time since I sit with a male and not feel actively threatened, not safe, precisely, but not threatened. We talked about studies sometimes, never about the garden, never his father. I hated him, I think, for refusing to put the pieces together, but I didn't show it. The gardener was never going to let us go, and Avery was too dangerous to try to influence. I wasn't sure Desmond was hope, but he was the closest thing to it that I could see. I wanted to live, and I wanted the other girls to live, but for the first time I wanted that myth of the escaped butterfly to be true. I wanted to believe I could get out without ending up in a glass or a riverbank. Then one night Desmond brought his violin. The gardener had told me his son was a musician, and I had seen the way his fingers slightly played the chords against his books, against rocks or knees, or any available surface when he was thinking. It was like he translated his thoughts into music so they could make sense. I was lying stomach down on the rock with my book and an apple in front of me, keeping an eye on the 3 girls down in the main garden. They were neck deep in a small pond, splashing at each other with the best they could, and I knew the senses would have alerted the gardener that someone was in the water, but they had to play long enough for him to get comfortable and move on to something else. He wasn't present in the garden that night. He mentioned something about a charity function with his wife, and I came to escort the new girl back to her room after the first tattoo session. But I didn't doubt that he had his way of watching us if he wanted to. Eleni and Izara had been there 3 or 4 years respectively, generally past the point of foolishness. But Adara had arrived only 2 months before me. She mostly held up well, but every now and then she would sink into severe bouts of depression, but they were nearly crippling. They're clinically based, and without her meds, I was surprised they weren't more frequent. But she tried to make sure she wasn't left alone during these episodes. She was mostly through the latest of them, but her moves still teetered. Desmond walked up the path, his case in his hand, stopped by the rock. Hi. Hello, I replied. Normal was a variable thing in the garden. I eyed the case in his hand. Would asking him to play me flatter his ego, or would it make him feel like I owed him a favor? I was skilled at reading a gardener and Avery. Desmond was more difficult. Unlike his father and brother, he didn't know what he wanted. I was good at escaping people, not manipulating them. This was a new ground. Play for me? I asked eventually. You wouldn't mind? I have a proficiency tomorrow, and I didn't want to wake up Mother. I was going to practice outside, but, he pointed up. I don't look, but there was a grain against the glass. I miss the feeling of grain. There was nearly always music playing in the apartment. Catherine liked classical, but Whitney liked Swedish rap, and Noemi liked bluegrass, whereas Amber liked country. And in the end, the most of the electric listening experience imaginable. There were some of the girls that had radios and players in their rooms. For most of us, music was a rare thing anymore. I closed the book and sat up with Desmond, rosined its bow, and stretched his fingers. I was fascinated to watch all the little rituals that went into warming up. But when he finally set the bow to strings to play for real, I realized why his father called him a musician. It was more than just playing, though. I was no expert. He seemed technically skilled, but he could make the notes weep or laugh across the strings. He infused each piece with emotion. Down to the pond. The trio stopped splashing, just floated so they could hear. I closed my eyes and let the music wrap around me. Sometimes when Catherine and I were sitting out on the fire escape or the roof at 3 or 4 in the morning after work, a guy from the next building would come over the roof and practice the violin. He'd fumble his fingering and his bow work wasn't always on tempo. But sitting in the semi-darkness, I was as close to the true night as the city could get. It was the violin was his lover. He never seemed to realize he had an audience. Every time in him focused on the instrument, the sounds it made between them. It was pretty much the only thing Catherine and I routinely did together. Even if it was the night off, we'd make sure we're awake to go outside and listen to that boy play. Desmond was better. He swayed smoothly from song to song, and when he eventually let the bowstring to his side, the last notes hovered expectantly. I didn't know you have a problem passing your proficiency, I whispered. Thanks. He checked over the instrument, cradling it gently, and then he satisfied all it should be. He put it away in the velvet-lined case. When I was younger, I used to dream about being a professional musician. Used to. My father took me to New York and arranged for me to spend a few days with a professional violinist to see what it would be like. I hated it, and it felt, well, soulless, I guess. Like I actually did that for a living. I grew to hate music, and I told my father I'd rather do something that would let me love music. He said he was proud of me. He seems frequently proud of you, I murmured, and he gave me a queer look. He talks to you about me? A little. You're his son. He loves you. Yes, but it doesn't strike you a little weird that he talks about his son to his captives? I decided not to tell him the entirety of his father has said about him. More weird to him having captives at all. True. And there he was, finally able to call us captives, and unable to try anything to change that fact. The stream that concentrated the waterfall in the pond was barely 3 feet deep, but Alani managed to swim all the way up to the rocks before standing. Maya, we're going in now. Do you need anything? Not that I can think of, thanks. Desmond shook his head. Sometimes you seem like a house mother. What a twisted little serenity. Do you hate me? What, for being your father's son? I'm starting to realize just how much, he said quietly. He sat down next to me on the rock, draping his arms over her bent knees. One of the girls in my fruit and young class has a butterfly tattoo on her shoulder. It's ugly and badly drawn. One of those butterfly-type fairies with the face that looks like a melted doll. But she was wearing a tube dress, and I saw it, and all I could think was the rest of the class that was your wings and how beautiful they are. They're horrible, but they're beautiful too. That was pretty much how we look at it, I replied neutrally, curious to see where he was going with this. I doubt the sight of your wings gets you off. Oh? Yes, definitely, his father's sons. But unlike his father, ashamed of that fact. In one of my other classes, we were taking hoarders, and I thought of my father's story about his father's butterfly collection. But when, of course, I thought about my father's version of that, and suddenly I was thinking about you again, how you could be dignified and nothing but ink and scars, and most people can manage fully clothed. For weeks now, I've been having these dreams, and I wake up sweating and hard, and I don't know if these nightmares or not. He shoved his hair back from his face, hooking the hand behind his neck. I don't want to believe I'm the type of person who could do this. Maybe you're not. I shrugged his sideways look. Going along with it complicated, but you don't mean to ever do it yourself. It's still going along with it. Right and wrong doesn't mean there's any easy choice. Why don't you hate me? I've been thinking about that a lot the past few weeks, and I still wasn't sure I found the answer. Maybe you're just trapped here as we are, I said slowly, except I did hate him a bit. Just as much as, but I didn't, but in a different way than his father or brother. He turned that over in a while. In a flash of lightning, I tried to make out the emotions racing across his face. It had his father's eyes, but he was much more self-aware than the gardener ever would be. The gardener clung to his delusions. Desmond eventually confronted the hard truths, at least the beginnings of them. He didn't know what to do with them. He didn't try to make them less than they were. Why don't you try to escape? Because girls before me did. Escaped? Tried. He winced. There is only one door that leads out of the space, and it's locked and coded at all times. You have to punch in your code at both entry and exit. When maintenance comes in and the rooms become soundproof, we could scream and pound all we want and no one would ever hear us. We could stay here and the walls came down maintenance. But someone tried about 10 years ago and nothing happened except that she disappeared and reappeared in a glass resin. But Desmond hadn't seen those butterflies. He seemed to forget that his father had said about keeping us after we die. I'm not sure if your father hires incurious people and we might have made it seem unexceptional, but where no one came to rescue. When it comes right down to it, though, we're afraid. Of freedom? Of what happens if we almost get there? I looked up at the night beyond the glass panes. Let's face it, he could kill all of us pretty quickly if he ever felt the need to. And if one of us made the attempt and failed, that's a way we wouldn't punish all of us for it. Or at least the one who made the attempt and me, because he thinks they'll tell me everything, and how would I know of such a plan? I'm sorry. And the asinine thing to say under the circumstances, I shook my head. I'm just sorry you never came here. The other sideways look, somewhere between hurt and amused. Completely sorry? He asked for a minute. I studied his face in the moonlight. Twice he'd helped me through my panic attacks, and even though he only knew about one, he was fragile in a way his father and brother weren't. Someone who wanted to be good, do good, and just didn't know how. No, I said eventually. Not completely. Not if I could figure out some way to lead him in usefulness. You're a very complicated person, and you're a complication. He laughed and held his hand out between us, palm up. I didn't hesitate to take it, lacing our fingers together. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder, and found a comfortable silence between us. He reminded me of Topher a bit, more complex, and just for a little while I wanted to pretend this boy wasn't his father's son, he was just my friend. I fell asleep that way, and when the morning sunlight struck my eyes, I slowly sat up and found that we curled together in the night, his hand on my hip and his other arm cushioning my cheek from the stone. The new girl wouldn't be awake for a few hours yet, but Desmond had classes at some point, a violin proficiency he'd passed without even trying. Hesitantly, I reached down and stroked the comb of his dark hair back from his forehead. He started unconsciously followed the gesture, and I couldn't help but smile. Wake up! No, he mumbled, grabbed my hand to shield his eyes. You have classes. Skip 'em. You have a proficiency. Proficient. You have finals next week. He sighed and turning his face-splitting yawn. He grudgingly got up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. You're bossy, but nice to wake up to. I looked away because I wasn't sure what was showing on my face. His fingertips lightly colloosed the strings, touched my chin, and brought my face back to his. The only thing there was a soft smile. He leaned forward and then caught himself starting to pull back. I closed the distance between us, his lips soft against mine. The light touch of my chin moved back until his hand would cut my cheek, and he dipped into the kiss until my head was swimming. It had been so long since I actually kissed someone, rather than allow them to force a kiss on me. The gardener thought his son could love me, and I thought he might be right. I also thought the love would prove a different motivation for the son than the father, I hoped. When Desmond moved away, he pressed a kiss against my cheek. Can I come see you after class? I nodded, even slightly acknowledged that my life had reached an entire new level of fucked up. And the gardener was happy about this? Actually, he was. I mean, I'm sure there was a certain degree of self-interest in it. After all, if Desmond was emotionally attached to one of more of us, it was unlikely to risk anything happening to us. That had to be part of it, but I think most of it was he genuinely enjoyed seeing his son happy. Victor sighs. Just when I think the story is going to get more twisted. It can always get more twisted, she smiles as she says it, but she knows better than to trust it. It's not just my smile, but not something that should be so easily displayed on a girl her age. That's life, right? No, Victor says quietly. It isn't. Or at least it shouldn't be. But that's not the same thing. Is and shouldn't are entirely different things. He started to think if Edison isn't coming back. He really can't blame him. If this is a twisted she's admitting to, how much worse is the twisted she's still hiding? How did things change after his finals? He was around more in the summer, except for an hour or so in the early afternoon when he walked with his parents to the outer greenhouse. If he came in the mornings, he stayed atop a cliff or in the library, respecting the privacy of my conversation with the other girls in the cave. Danielle had come to replace Lionette as my place in more delicate conversations. Just as she started taking the night shift with our new arrivals. There wasn't much of the night shift, given that they were in a drugged sleep, but still, I appreciated being able to get some space. And despite the wings that spread across her cheeks and forehead, Danielle would be trusted as a sensible option. I'd grown used to her double set of red-spotted purples, with a contrast of deep, rich color and bright pattern breaks. I don't say it suited her any more than the ones on my back suited me, but she made them a part of her and learned the experience. She and Marenka were the last to receive the wings in their faces. After that, they had been talked to everyone else out of the sucking up to extent. There had been some who came close, but they hadn't crossed the line yet. I looked the earliest conversation she traded me once the new girl showed the signs of waking. Danielle held back on actually meeting the new girls until they were more or less settled, just like the others with the wings on their faces did. After the first session, I was actually in the room whenever the gardener worked on the new girl's tattoo. She hated needles, but if I read to her and let her squeeze the ever-loving fuck out of my arm, she could lie still for it. It was the request that I was there, rather than the gardener's, though. I think he was pleased by it, and as it read a line from the Count of the Monte Cristo, I wonder what counted irony. I watched the brilliant ice blue of the spring azure spread across their porcelain skin, broken by the occasional veins or fringes of silver white, and one narrow band midnight blue in the tips of her upper wings. Bliss brought an ice pack with an entree to put on my now perpetually bruised arm. The gardener didn't touch me if Desmond was in the garden, but his son's interest in me roused a corresponding excitement in him. It was no secret among the girls that he liked me best, honestly. I think they were relieved, but he'd gone from coming to me 2 or 3 times a week to damn near every day. He still went to the other girls, of course, but when he was with no one else, he didn't care if his younger son was in the garden or not. And there was still Avery, with his fangs mostly pulled to the destruction of the playroom, and near clear pride of his father had in Desmond, was his younger brother a strong example of how their father wanted us treated. It was hard for him to give in to the things he enjoyed. I grew to hate lunch, because every single day when Desmond went to share the meal in the early afternoon with his mother, the gardener came to me with needs that make his hands shake. I started taking lunch in my room, so I just wouldn't have to suffer the indignity of him coming to the dining room and calling my name across the conversations. Even though she knew Jasmine hadn't done any more than kiss me, he would thought of that what he would do make enough the gardener nearly mess his pants. And dear fucking Christ, the possibility that he scored the security footage hoping to see his son with me was enough to make my brain turn off completely. At least those visits had a specific time limit, because he had to be up at the house at 1:45 to meet his wife for their walk. While the family strolled along the square and out of greenhouse, I spent an hour with the girl christened Teresa. He was just shy of 17, the daughter of 2 litigators, and almost never spoke above a whisper. When she did, it was important, like her asking me to read to her while the gardener inked her wings. She could also be drawn into conversation about music. She played piano. We learned and wanted to be a professional pianist. And she and Ravina would talk for hours about the ballet scores. She paid attention and noticed the undercurrents of any given circulation. She also seemed to understand the precarious existence even before I showed her display cases the first week. For her sake, so she'd been a way to keep herself grounded, I asked the gardener to give her a keyboard. She installed an upright piano in the one in the empty rooms, replacing the bed with a beautiful instrument and the entire wall of filing cabinets of sheet music. Except for the meals, sleep, and putting her the visits from the gardener, numerous because she was new, she was in the room, playing piano until her hands cramped. Desmond met me in the hallway one afternoon, leaning against the garden side wall, his head tipped to one side as he listened. "What happens if someone has a breakdown?" he asked quietly. "In what way?" She nodded in the direction of the doorway. "You can hear in the music. She's disintegrating. She isn't choppy, changing the tempos, pounding at the keys. Maybe she doesn't talk, but doesn't mean she's adapting. You never really forgot that she was a psych major. Well, she'll never either break or she won't. There's a limit to and what I can do to prevent that. But what happens if she does? You know what happens. You just don't want to admit it." He'd never asked why Simone hadn't returned. Teresa's arrival was agreed with a consultation, followed by an nauseous converted effort not to think about it too deeply. Desmond palled, but nodded to show he understood. When he promptly changed the subject, "If you don't look at the bad thing can't see you, right? Bliss has some sort of project spread out over a rock," she told me. "If I sat on top of the clay, she would shove it up my nose." "What's she working on?" "I have no idea." She was still softening the clays. Summer afternoons were almost unbearably warm in the garden. The heat soaking through the glass. Most girls spent the afternoons in the water or shade to escape it, or in the rooms so they could actually feel the cooler air moving through the vents. I wasn't going to disturb Bliss as she was working on something, especially if she was doing it in the hottest part of the garden. So I took Desmond's hand and led him down the hall. It was cooler in the back corner, and the base of the cliff stood directly at the hall glass and blocked the sunlight. I turned into my room, and Desmond immediately began studying the shelf above my bed. He tapped the carousel to make it spin. "For some reason, I really don't see you as a carousel person," he said, turning to me. "I'm not." "Then why? Someone else was." He looked back at the carousel and didn't say anything. He couldn't ask for more about hitting things if he tried not so hard not to think about it. "The gifts we gave away as much about us as the gifts we get to keep," he murmured eventually. He touched the muzzle on the sad little dragon, which now had a tiny pajama-clad teddy bear to keep him company. "Is it the things that were important or the people? I thought the classes were over this summer." He gave a sheepish grin. "Habit? Right." My room had changed a bit for the first day. My sheets were deep rose and the blanket of rich, brilliant purple, with stacks of pillows in the pale fawn brown. My toilet and shower both concealed with drapes of matching brown, rose purple sashes, hanging loose against the walls in the case I wanted to clip back from them for any reason. There are two short bookcases along the wall and various books that the gardener had given me personally, rather than adding them to the library, and the knickknacks spilled over the shelves, and the most important, or at least the most personal, staying on the shelf above the bed. Other than the knickknacks, it was hard to say the room reflected anything about me. I hadn't chosen everything about it. Even the trinkets were part of pinned down, really. Vita was once painted me a lovely sea chrysanthemum on a rock, but that showed her sunny personality, not mine. By keeping it, it just meant she was important to me. And then there was thing that made her conscious just to show not mine the space was. The blinky red camera light above the door. I sat on the bed and with my back against the wall and watched him bend sideways and read the spines of the books. How many of these were my father's choice? Maybe half. The brothers Karamazov? No, that one was mine. Really? He grinned at me and shoulder. Dense, isn't it? On the surface, it's fun to discuss. I discussed a lot of books with Zara, but never the classics. That was something Noemi and I had done. Dissecting them, getting into debates about who would last for days or even weeks without being resolved. Rereading Dostoevsky kept Noemi fresh in my mind, and the day that wasn't a painful directly reminded myself of her when she had others in New York. There was a book or each of the girls from the apartment. It was subtler than Nazaria's drawings or bliss figures, but the same impulse. "Why am I not surprised that you like books with layers?" He finished the pursuit and stood next to the bed, hands in his pockets. "You could sit on the bed, you know. This is your space," he said awkwardly. "I don't want to presume." "You can sit on the bed, you know." He smiled at the time and toed off his shoes, sitting next to me on top of the blankets. We kissed a few times since that first one, each one tentative, just a little overwhelming. His father, and to a lesser extent his brother, hovered between us whenever it seemed might go a little further. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Actually, I wasn't sure about much of anything when it came to Desmond. We talked about his friends and his school, and even that his was hard sometimes. It had been in the garden long enough that the outside world somewhat surreal, like a half-believed legend. Eventually, it was time for dinner, time for him to go back to his house for a while so his mother didn't wonder where he was all the time. And when he walked down the hall hand in hand, If I walked him into the entrance, would he send me away before he punched his code into the lock? I wondered whether the precaution was one his father drilled into him. If I ran through the door, would he take pity and let me go? Would I get to the police back there, the other girls, before anything happened to them? If I hadn't been absorbed with the problem of the door, I might have noticed right away that might have recognized how strange the silence was. But it took me a minute to realize he wouldn't have been hearing piano music down the eerie stretch of hallway. I dropped his hand, not caring if he followed, and ran to the music room, terrified of what I might see. Teresa was alive and uninjured, but broken. She sat on the piano bench. Everything was posture correct and perfect, but her hands weren't even on the keys. Arched and poised, she looked like she was about to burst into music at any point. Unless you looked at her face, tears tracked silently down her cheeks. I had the absolutely vacant look in her eyes and understand that whatever made Teresa wasn't there anymore. Sometimes it happened as quickly as a blink, as a heartbeat, as anything would have been normal in one to the next. I straddled the bench next to her, one hand against her neck, still staring straight ahead at nothing. She shuddered. If you can come back, please try, I whispered. I know it's bad, but after there's nothing, worse than nothing. Do you think we could make it worse by trying something? Desmond asked carefully. Try what? Here, come off the bench. I hold her in the very edge. He sat down at the very end and carefully scooted her until we full range of the keys. Teresa didn't fight or struggle, even put her hands away. Desmond took a deep breath and started to play, something soft and gentle, full of pain. Teresa's breath hinched, only a sign that she heard. I closed my eyes as the song continued, my chest tightening with the tears. I didn't know how to shed. He didn't just play, he infused, and the more he went, the more Teresa shook her arms. Until finally she burst into heaving sobs and buried her face in my chest. Desmond kept playing, and now the song changed to something light and airy, not cheerful so much as comforting. Teresa wept, but she was there, still a little broken with the new essential pieces missing, but responsive. I hugged her tightly, and for an agonizing moment I wondered if it would have been kinder to let her stay shattered, or to let her die. When she didn't show up at dinner or send for trays, Lorraine told the gardener. We were still in the music room, coaxing Teresa to play something for us, and we appeared in the doorway. I noticed him. There was no spare so much thought, too intent on a girl who was still shaking like a leaf. Desmond kept his voice soft, made no sudden movement, and finally she put her hands back on the keys, depressing a single note. Desmond pressed a note lower down. Teresa hit another one, which he answered, and gradually the notes became chords and progressions, until they were a duet almost recognized. When it was done, she took a deep breath, slow breath, let it out, and then another. You get used to it, she whispered almost inaudibly. I very carefully didn't look at the doorway. Yes, you do. She nodded and used her skirt to wipe off her face and throat, and started singing another song. Thank you. We listened to a couple songs until the gardener stepped in the room and get my attention. He crooked his finger and I bit back a sigh. Getting to my feet and joining him in the hallway, Desmond followed. Desmond had saved her, but wouldn't admit it to himself that he saved her from. Lorraine said you skipped dinner, he said quietly. Teresa was having a rough patch, I answered. She was a little more important than dinner. Will she be all right? She had to be, or she'd be in glass. I glanced at Desmond and looked at my hand in a right squeeze. I don't think this will be the last rough patch you'll have, but I think this will be the worst. Delayed shock, I guess. Desmond got her playing again, though. Yes, so that's a good sign. Desmond, the gardener smiled. The concern replaced with pride, and he gripped her son's shoulder. I'm glad to hear it. Is there anything I could do to help her? But I bit my lip and he actually shook his finger at me. Maya, the truth, now. It might be the best if you didn't have sex with her for a little while, I sighed. Spend time with her, fine, but don't think sex is ask more of her than she give right now. He blinked at me, somewhat taken aback, but Desmond nodded. Oh my goodness. Now the gardener knows the truth. How will that be prevailed? I don't truly know. But what I do know is the Super Bowl times. I also know that today we read pages 181 to 200. Next time we'll be reading 201 to 220. I'll go get you guys the Super Bowl results as of right now. What is the Super Bowl score as of right now?
In Super Bowl 59, the Eagles are currently leading the Chiefs 40-14 with about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter.
How many quarters are there in a football game? 4 quarters. So yeah, unless they can make 37 more points in 4 minutes, the Eagles have won. Which yeah, wasn't really my wasn't on my bingo card this morning. What is on my bingo card is that we're gonna go learn about Learning Corner of the day, doing it up Stonsey's way, Bop. Today we're learning about the Mastiff. Big old dogs. I love these dogs. They're huge, they're big old cuddle bugs, and they're kind of dumb looking. But before I can make fun of any animal, or maybe even its history, or what it looks like, I should learn of its history. Not only does it make me look more credible, but it also makes me look smart in front of my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother. Sorry, hiccups. Whew, and basically everyone. And it makes me more intelligent. Now, intelligence doesn't necessarily lie in just knowing things. It also derives in knowing and teaching things, though that is just my opinion. Yeah, I mean, knowing things is great. Teaching things is better. And yeah, just knowing things is a great way of existence. Well, the history of the Mastiff is that the Mastiff is a prototypical breed of the ancient Mastiff group of dogs. The confusion between the Mastiff breed and the Mastiff family makes it very difficult to trace the history of the breed. Even though the Mastiff family is one of the oldest and most influential of the dogdom, the breed of the undoubtedly of more recent, though the ancient origin. By the time of Caesar, Mastiffs are used as war dogs and gladiators. In medieval times, they were used as guard dogs and hunting dogs and became widespread and commonplace. Mastiffs later stepped to the arena, dogfighting, bull baiting, and bear baiting. Even when the cruel sports were banned in England in 1835, they continued in popular events, and the modern Mastiff descends not only in these dog pits, but also from the noble lines. Being descendants of one of the most famous Mastiffs of all time, the Mastiffs of Sir Piers Ley, when Sir Ley was wounded in the Battle of Agincourt, a Mastiff stood over him and protected him for many hours through the battle. Although he later died, the Mastiff returned to Ley's home and was the foundation of the Lime Hall Mastiffs. 5 centuries later, the Lime Hall Mastiffs figured prominently in the founding of the modern breed. Some evidence exists that the Mastiffs came to America on the Mayflower, but the breed's documented entry to America did not occur until the late 1800s. The breed was nearly decimated in England by World War II, but sufficient numbers have been brought to America by that time to keep the breed going. Since that time, it has gradually risen in popularity. So, I want this historical dog in my house, so how is it with kids? Will it teach them the right and wrong? And most importantly, will it better suit my life better than it did its predecessors? Well, the temperament of the Mastiff is that it's initially good and natured, calm, easygoing, and surprisingly gentle. It's a well-mannered house pet and needs sufficient room to stretch out. It's an extremely loyal breed and not enough extremely demonstrative. It's devoted to its family, good with children. So, what's the upkeep? How do I keep this royal yet kind dog in good check? Well, the upkeep is that the adult Mastiff needs daily moderate exercise consisting of either good walk or game. It does not enjoy hot weather. It can live outdoors in temperate or cool weather. It does well in the warm and weather. In fact, even though it may be physically able to live outside, it is a breed that should live inside with its family so that it can be inclined to fulfill its role in devoted guardian. It tends to drool. Coat care is minimal. Now, if you're an adult or a teenager, please listen up. If you're a child, please go watch, I don't know, Kai Cenat or whoever the heck is current nowadays, because we're going to be talking about the health. So we're going to be talking about the major concerns or minor concerns medically, what they're occasionally seen with as a breed, the suggested test, the lifespan, and a note from the second edition D. Caroline Coyle, PhD. Major concerns of the Mastiff is CHD and gastrotorsion, so tummy. Minor concerns is albodysplasia, osteosarcoma, and cystinuria, which I'm pretty sure is a cyst disease. Albodysplasia is it's like a pulled muscle, but for a dog, but it's a lot worse. They're occasionally seen with cardiomyopathy, allergies, vaginal hyperplasia, crenate ligament rupture, and hypothyroidism, OCD, entropin, PRA, and PPM. So a lot. Suggested tips are for the hip, elbow, eye, thyroid, DNA, or PRA. Their lifespan is 9 to 11 years, and the note says obesity can be a problem with the breed. Now, imagine you don't see this picture in front of you. What's the form? What's the function? And what does it do? Well, the form and function is that the say that 5 times fast. The massive Mastiff is heavy boned and with powerful musculature, being slightly longer than tall. Make that number 2. It combines great strength and endurance. Its power and strength are evident in its gait, which is of a good reach and drive. The double coat consists of a dense undercoat and straight, coarse outer coat of moderately short length. The expression is alert and kindly. The overall impression would be one of grandeur and dignity. Now, for the tier list of today's episode, it goes a little something like this. 5 is the best, 4 is better, 3 is average, 2 is the worst, and 1 is the worst unless it comes to grooming. 1 second, please. I accidentally just harvested my crops. I didn't mean to. Gosh dang it. Whatever. Sorry, I'm playing a game while doing this. The energy level and playfulness are at a 1, so this is a very tired dog. Exercise requirements are at a 2, so low. Affection level and friendliness towards other pets is at a 4. Friendliness towards dogs is at a 3. Friendliness towards strangers is at a 2, so not much. Ease of training is at a 3, so average. Watchdog ability is at a 5, so that's really good. Protection ability is at a 4, which is better than average. Well, it's actually just good. Grooming requirements is at a 1, which we love. Cold tolerance is at a 3, with a trade-off of heat tolerance being a 2. So basically, it's just debuffed with a heat tolerance of 2. The healthy weight of a Mastiff male and female should be 175 to 190 pounds. And the height of a male should be a minimum 30 inches and a female a minimum of 27.5 inches. And not feet, because then we'd be living in a world of giants. Huh. Another one, huh? This one looks like it needs to iron its clothes. And that breed of dog is the one you'll be learning about in the next episode. So, hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. I also want to talk about real quick. I did this entire video without stopping a single time. And I usually do like little pause videos where I'll turn off my mic, like I just did there, and get a drink of water or something. I just edit it, I'm pretty sure people could notice that. But I did this entire episode in one take. And I'm very proud of myself for that. Because this is a freaking big book! So yeah, super fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time.